Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1989 crime drama film Drugstore Cowboy. Now, before I get around to sharing my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Brian for requesting this review. And if there is another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Drugstore Cowboy is one of those films that honestly I have never seen until recently. And I liked this, but I didn't love it. There's a lot of people who admire this, who love it, who think it's amazing, it's tremendous, it's unbelievably good, and I think in some instances that is correct. I think visually this film is incredible. It's definitely one of the more visually stimulating and stunning crime dramas that deal with drug abuse and druggies that I've seen. And it does have some very inspired bits of writing. I think there are some quotes in particular that really stick with you and make you think. And there are other elements of it that I think are definitely worthy of praise. And that's a big part of why I at least like the movie. But I just wasn't really that emotionally connected to it all. It's directed by Gus Van Sant, who, in my opinion, did a great job with this. This film features some really unique and really intriguing direction. Um, this was Gus Van Sant's second film, and this still stands as one of his best efforts as a director. I just think he did a really great job capturing the seediness, the griminess of the Portland location. This is old Portland. I am in the Pacific Northwest, and I grew up in the Tiger Portland area, and I remember what old Portland used to look like, at least when it comes to certain parts of the city. Before a lot of things came in, and they built all these buildings, these skyscrapers, and all this other stuff, and the historic buildings were shut down or demolished, and so on and so forth. So I don't necessarily remember the '70s stuff, but I remember what used to look like in terms of the things that were left over in the '90s. And I also remember looking at different books and things like that that showcase what old Portland, old Oregon used to look like. So that was definitely really cool to see. And Gus Van Sant did a really good job showcasing all the different elements and aspects of that particular setting and location, and really did make the film stand out because of that. There's not very many films take place in Portland in the 1970s. So I definitely did appreciate that. And I think that when it comes to the drug scenes, when the characters are on a trip, the direction is definitely at its best. It's at its finest when it's very experimental, and you got floaty camera work, and you got all these other really inventive and really visually interesting and stimulating ways to utilize the camera. I like that the camera itself actually is an extension of the characters when they're high. I thought that was a really good choice by Gus Van Sant. And overall, I think that this is a really well directed film when it comes to the camera angles, the framing, and also the way that Gus Van Sant works with his cast and gets some very strong performances out of them. So, directing wise, Drugstore Cowboy is definitely the kind of drug that I really like, and I definitely can't get enough of. So, I can't really say anything that negative about the direction, because the direction is definitely a major standout, and a major shining element of this particular film. Now, the screenplay by Gus Van Sant and Daniel Yost, based upon the memoir Drugstore Cowboy by James Fogle, it's a good script, but I don't think it's a great script. It doesn't really do that great of a job making you get to know these characters. And I know I've seen people say, "Oh, what you want to meet cute in Drugstore Cowboy?" No, I just want some actual character development and character depth instead of the bare minimum. So I can care about these characters one way or another. So their choices in life when it comes to them deciding to be these drug addicts and go around and steal all these drugs from these pharmacies actually carries some genuine weight instead of you just following around a bunch of druggies you barely know anything about and then just following their misadventures and following them trying to stay one step ahead of the law and also trying to stay high. Like it just there's only so much intrigue you can get or you can glean from that. It only goes so far. It only gets you so high. And so I just don't really feel that there was enough character depth and development. I wanted to know more about Bob and Diane. And it doesn't have to be about their childhood, just more about them and how they met. Just that simple thing. Maybe just a little bit of what they were or what they were like before they started getting addicted to drugs and stealing drugs from these pharmacies. Like, so then when they start going down this path, it has so much more resonance. It actually feels like there's something more to it than just not really much of anything other than, oh, they fell in love and they've been together and known each other for years and they got married, and that's really about it. And it's the same way for the other characters too. You don't really get to know a whole lot about them either. Nadine, you kind of get the assumption that she's a runaway, but that's really about it. Rick is more of the same, to be perfectly honest. I guess you get a little bit in terms of him being an understudy of Bob, but beyond that, not much. You just don't really get enough, in my opinion, in terms of depth for these characters. So when they get involved in all these escapades or all these different situations involving them trying to steal drugs or doing all this other stuff and going to extreme lengths to stay high, it just doesn't really have as much of an impact as I think it could have if you just had like a little bit extra when it comes to character development and depth for these characters. That's the main problem that I have with this script, because after a certain point, I just don't really care. I don't care about these druggies. I don't care about them getting their next high. I don't care about them staying one step ahead of the police. I don't care about any of that. But what keeps me going, though, is the combination of the visuals, which are really unique and cool and very well done. And for the most part, very well utilized when it comes to the direction and the transitions and whatever little bits of visual effects that the film has, and the editing and the performances. Like, and some of the moments involving these characters, like the first drug bust that you see, where Nadine is faking having a seizure and just the way that that all goes down, or the tension involved when it comes to that scene later on in the film after Nadine is overdosed and Bob and his wife Diane trying to find a way to get the body past this whole group of sheriffs who have arrived for a sheriff convention in town and are there at the hotel. So that was definitely something that I felt was pretty compelling. Good amount of tension there. And I also like the last 20 minutes or so when Bob is trying to go clean and he meets up with this old pastor, or this old I don't know if he's a pastor or not, this old father of his, Father Tom Murphy. And they have this bond and this friendship, and it's complicated because Father Tom Murphy is an addict as well, and he has certain opinions about drugs that are definitely not what you would necessarily think that a person of the parish or a person of the church would share. And so there's a certain amount of intrigue with that. The whole conflict between Bob and this cop who's trying to pin him down and trying to bust him in Gentry, I also felt was rather effective. That worked fairly well when it comes to the script. But there's other stuff, like other than just the meandering nature of it all, when it comes to just the fact that you just don't really care about the characters and their fate. It doesn't help either that certain characters like Rick, like after Nadine overdoses, you never hear from him again. It's like he just disappears from the film entirely. You hear about him, but you never see him. So you hear about him, but you don't see him. So you might as well never hear from him again because you never see him visually. He's just completely gone from the movie. There's no more dialogue, there's no more scenes, there's no more things involving his character. He just leaves the hotel one day and never comes back. You then find out that when Bob decided to get clean and go back home, and Diane refused to go with him, she wound up becoming Rick's girl. But you find that out with a line of dialogue from Diane when she's coming to visit Bob later in the movie. And you get a bittersweet scene where Bob is trying to get her back, but she just isn't willing to go through with it. Like, he even wants her to stay the night, but she's not willing to risk that and just decides to go back with Rick. But that would have been so much more powerful and carry so much more weight if the film and the overall story decided to have more depth for those characters, get to know their relationship better beyond their relationship with drugs, which maybe that was the point, but it still is something that is inherently empty. It just doesn't really have as much of a connection as it would have if you had more to those characters. If you're not going to do that, then beef up the scenes when Bob is trying to go clean. Have more scenes with him interacting with the halfway house and the other addicts. Have more scenes with him and Father Tom Murphy. Like, have more scenes like that. Have a scene with him and his mom when his mom sees that he's actually trying to make progress with his life and trying to legitimately go clean, and sees that he's got a real job. Like, have stuff like that. Like, have more of those scenes when he's trying to go clean. If you're not going to really flesh out some of the other aspects of the film. And the whole ending with David, the guy who he was this young punk who he initially was like some guy who Bob kind of bullied around, just kind of got whatever he wanted out of him. But then when Bob decided to go clean, then he decided to take over some of Bob's turf, and he started getting a big head, and he started getting more power and influence through all his drug deals. And then he ultimately winds up getting roughed up by Bob because he's trying to essentially intimidate this kid to give him his money for some drug deal or something that the kid owes him. And Bob shows up, gets in David's face, embarrasses him in front of his heavy, So then, predictably, David then shows up later on and tries to steal these drugs that Diane left Bob, but Bob gave them to the father, gave them to the priest, and then David winds up shooting Bob. Now, the ending, I think, is deliberately ambiguous in terms of whether or not Bob's going to die en route to the hospital or die of his gunshot wound, or whether he's going to live and then go back to his old ways. I don't mind the ambiguity of the ending. It took me a bit to get it though, because I was like, this is very vague and kind of hard to really decipher. But then I thought about it a little bit longer, and then I was like, okay, all right, I see where the writer is going here. And that's how the story is framed, by the way. Him in the back of the hospital, I mean the back of the ambulance. Him in the back of the ambulance reminiscing about his life, and it concludes with him in the back of the ambulance again. And the ending as a result is, it's, I wouldn't say the most satisfying ending, but it's interesting. The stuff with David though is very predictable. And I honestly wish the writers went a different route there, because it was just so predictable from the moment you saw the scene in the alley. You're like, okay, he's gonna show up and he's gonna shoot him, or there's gonna be some confrontation, gonna be something that's gonna happen, and he's the reason why Bob is in the back of the ambulance. It was so predictable, like for a film that for the most part had some moments that were fairly unpredictable. Like I didn't see the overdose happening exactly when it did for Nadine, because I didn't even know that she even took the Dilaudid. And I didn't necessarily see some of the drugstore busts going down the exact way that they did. I didn't see Diane and Bob breaking up, and I definitely didn't see Bob trying to legitimately go clean. Um, that's another thing though that could have been handled a bit better, because it's such a sudden shift for him. Like it's explained later in a line of dialogue by Bob when he's talking to Diane about how he saw the cops there at the hotel, and he just felt like, oh, I gotta get clean, and I prayed to God, and I said, hey, you know, if you spare me, you know, let me get out of this and get this body out of here, and I'll just go back home and I'll get clean and I'll make an honest living. And it's like, okay, all right, but without that particular scene, that whole transition seems way too abrupt. Why not actually have the scene where he's praying to God? Why not? I don't understand why that scene could not have been in there. Why does it have to be something that he tells Diane later? But that's just me personally. Either way, I think it's okay, because at least you have that moment between the two that explains his shift. But before that, it just seemed like it was random and out of nowhere and out of character for Bob to have such a sudden shift when it comes to him trying to get sober. But other than some other elements in terms of the plot and the way that it unfolds not working as well as I feel they could have, this script does genuinely still have some great moments in it. Some of the moments I already mentioned, as well as some lines of dialogue that really do make you think. Like a lot of the stuff with Tom the priest, where he's all like, narcotics have been systematically scapegoated and demonized, which is legitimately true. And so is this. I predict that in the future, right wingers will use drug hysteria as a pretext to set up an international police apparatus. That is really ahead of its time. And then you have like quotes from Bob, you know, well, to begin with, nobody can talk a junkie out of using. You can talk to them for years, but sooner or later, they're going to get a hold of something. Maybe it's not dope. Maybe it's booze. Maybe it's glue. Maybe it's gasoline. Maybe it's a gunshot to the head. But something to relieve the pressures of their everyday life, like having to tie their shoes. So it does have some genuine merit, and I can definitely see why it gets praised just for some of its really strong dialogue. But I feel the story that's surrounding all these really strong moments of dialogue and these strong performances and this strong direction isn't really on the same level as all of these other things. It just needed a little bit more heart, a little bit more soul, a little bit more depth. And then I really feel that it would have been uh, so much better, and I wouldn't have been so just not really that enamored with it story wise. Like it didn't draw me in. It just was just kind of intermittently in and out for me when it comes to my engagement because of just the way that the script was written. But I do appreciate the fact that it's willing to take some chances, it's willing to be different. The way that it discusses things like superstitions was definitely very fascinating to me, like the stuff with the dog and mentioning the dog and what happened the last time that Bob and Diane had a dog, or the hat on the bed, and how that also correlates with the last quote, the last bit of narration from Bob that concludes the film. So I do like the script despite my issues with it, but I don't love this story and I don't love this screenplay for the reasons that I've detailed and mentioned already. I love this cast though. I think this cast is amazing. Like Matt Dillon was magnificent as Bob. This is easily one of his best performances. He fits so well with this character. His just I wouldn't say lackadaisical, but just his whole chill demeanor, the way that he approached things, the way that he just didn't want to grow up, just wanted to go from one high to the next. Uh, just a really a great performance with a lot of nuances and a lot of different layers, and just a really compelling performance. Even though the character could have had more depth to me, Matt Dillon's performance was so strong that I was, for the most part, compelled to finish the film just to see what he had in store, just to see how far and how much he was gonna put into this film, and how far he was gonna go with the performance. Kelly Lynch, I also felt was equally as good as Diane. She had really good chemistry with Matt, and I bought that they were a couple. I bought that they loved one another, but would have liked to have a little bit more to understand their dynamic more fully. But it was still a good performance by her. James Legros was fine as Rick, but there's really not much to his character. Heather Graham was more the same as Nadine. Uh, Max Perlich played the same guy that he played in Rush. The same exact character. That's the squirrely, druggy guy. Uh, James Remar. It was a nice performance by him as Gentry. And William S. Burroughs stole every scene that he was in as Father Tom Murphy. So this is a good cast. And the cinematography by Robert Ewerman. This is a film that just looks great. Even though it deals with very grungy and grimy locations, it looks very good and has a really nice style to it visually. And the editing by Mary Bauer and Curtis Clayton, I also feel was pretty exemplary. Definitely top notch stuff. Fit the vibe and the tone of the film very well. Added a lot to the movie when it comes to the drug trip sequences and the daydreams or all this other stuff, that the fantasy sequences when you get to see inside of Bob's head when he's on a high. And the music by Elliot Goldenthal, at points it works with the movie, at other points it doesn't. At times it sounds like something you would hear in Pee-wee, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, or it sounds like something you would hear in a quirky comedy, not in a crime drama. So I think at points the score actually hurts the film because it really takes you out of the scene because it's providing a completely different tone than what's actually on the screen. So I think this score would fit in like a quirky comedy by the Coen brothers or something. Like it definitely sounds like something you would hear from Carter Burwell or Ry Cooder. But it doesn't really sound like something that really fits consistently with the tone of this movie. The songs that they used for the soundtrack, though, I felt that they were well utilized and were good picks for the scenes that they were utilized in. When it comes to the pacing, it's a little slow at points because, like I said, it gets to a certain point where you just don't really care. I don't care about these druggies. I don't care if they get busted by the cops. I don't care if they OD. I don't give a shit. So I think that's definitely something that the film really kind of dropped the ball on for me is just giving you a reason to care about these characters beyond just seeing how they're going to get their next high. But that's just me. And I think that's a problem with a lot of these movies that focus on druggies in general. Because I wasn't super big on Rush either. And I'm not a super big fan of this one because of the same reason. But I would say that I like this more than Rush. I think this is a better movie than Rush. And it's not a bad film. It's just not my personal cup of tea when it comes to the kind of movies that I like to watch. It's it's fine for what it is. I liked it. It had some good performances by the cast. I really felt it was well directed, and there were other elements of it that I did enjoy and I found to be compelling enough for what they were. But as a whole, it honestly just left me wanting more from it. And for a film that's so highly praised, like I just didn't really feel it was on the same level as other people um, make it out to be. I wouldn't put it anywhere near as high on my list of films from 1989 as other people do. I wouldn't put this film on such a high pedestal, but that's just me personally. A lot of people are probably going to agree to disagree, and that's fine. But I would still recommend it though. I would, especially if you're a Matt Dillon fan or you just want to see something that's a little bit more off the beaten path, so to speak, when it comes to your entertainment. I think that this is definitely something that can broaden your horizons a little, and I would recommend it uh, in that regard. But that's just my thoughts on Drugstore Cowboy, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.